Welcome to the Cloudless Mind podcast about neuroscience, non-duality, and change management. Introducing your hosts, Paul Smit and Scott Byrd.
So welcome back to the Cloudless Mind podcast. Today, we are going to focus on a really interesting topic. It's the world of practice. So much of the world is oriented around this idea of being someone that practices something or someone that is looking to perfect something through practice or get somewhere from this idea of practice. And today we're going to drill down into that idea because in many ways, the way that we see the world is a lot different than the way society views practice. So I think that a great way to start this podcast and have people understand where we're coming from would be from an experience that I had with my son several months ago when I went to a climbing gym with him. And what happened was first of all, he's been climbing for about 7 months, and it's become an incredible passion for him. And, I notice how he just, there's nothing that will stop him from going. So he's got this true, sincere desire to be really good at what he's doing. So Paul, one day I went down and I was observing him, and I was looking around at the gym and talking with a bunch of people that have been coming to that gym for, many, many years. I was watching them, and I watched my son get up there, and immediately it was apparent to me that he was probably better than anyone else that I was seeing in there in a really short period of time. And it was fascinating to me, like how that happened, and really from his point of view, how that happened. And when I asked him that, he had a really simple answer. He said, "Dad, I practice what I don't know." And that right there was the distinction that we believe makes all the difference. So what I mean by that is most people in their lives practice what they know. My son practiced what he didn't know. And from that had him leapfrog in performance in a way that was most people wouldn't think would be necessary.
For instance, my dad, he does the opposite. He practices what he knows, which he's totally fine with. He's 73 years old. He's a country and Western guitar player and singer. And the way he plays, it's really steady. But he has never improved over the last 20 years. He's just very steady at what he's doing, which is totally fine for what he does. But if you want to reach higher levels, then the best thing you can do is to constantly trigger yourself to reach higher levels. So it's also the famous 10,000 hour rule. They say once you've practiced approximately 10,000 hours, that's when you're a professional, because your brain just needs time to make stronger connections. But it's not just the 10,000 hours, but it's also extending your limits constantly. Because I have driven my car for 10,000 hours, but I'm not a Formula One car driver. And so it's a very clear example with your son. He's so passionate, and he just goes for the 8th and 9th, and not for the ones and the twos.
Right, and I think I love how you said that. It's actually his passion that creates the change that really pulls him to doing something like that, where and you can really start to see true sincerity and passion from that place. Now, I have a question about what you just said. First of all, I love that example about the driving a car for 10,000 hours, and that it's not really about the 10,000 hours. It's actually how you use that. So what we might rephrase this is the practice is great, but the question would be, is the practice actually getting you where you want to go?
Yeah.
Now, if you wanted to be a Formula One driver, you would realize you would at some point need to wake up and to the fact that, I'm not practicing this. The normal driving I'm doing is not going to get me there.
No, because these guys are constantly busy challenging themselves and trying new things. And I think that's exactly the same with a guitarist.
Yes.
If you want to become a Steve Vai or Slash, you need that amount of hours to practice, but also experiment and challenge yourself to get your skill at the highest level.
Yeah, and as I go through with my coaching work, it's really fascinating to hear people talk about what they do day to day and how they describe how they think that they're getting to whatever, let's say, next level or next milestone or goal. And quite often, all they're doing is they're just explaining to me a pattern that they've repeated over and over in terms of what they're doing, but expecting to get, and then really wondering why they didn't get there. Now, I think it's really useful to talk a little bit about, let's talk a little bit about what's actually going on in the brain in that instance.
Yeah.
Or someone that is practicing, or let's take your dad or that. What do you think's going on in his brain that would have, like, we can use guitar because we're the three of us all play guitar. And I know if I just stretch if I try to stretch my fingers on 4 frets, that's painful for me sometimes.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about that. I think it'd be interesting.
Yeah, there are certain aspects about this. When someone tells you, in this company, I've got 27 years of experience, then normally what they mean, I've got 1 year of experience, which I repeated 26 times.
That's right.
So what happens in the brain if you do the same pattern over and over again, it just makes those same patterns stronger. So you become really strong at that routine, which is in a way smart for the brain to do because it saves you energy. And the mammalian brain is very lazy, so it tries to avoid doing any effort. So by doing your routine, you're saving energy. So that's why passion makes all the difference, because with passion, the brain triggers itself to create new connections. But creating new connections takes more effort, takes more energy, and can be a real struggle to do that, because you have to break your routines and do things you're not used to, which is hard for the brain. But that's why people who got really a lot of grit reach the highest levels, like Navy SEALs, for instance. It's insane amount of grit they have, but they challenge their brains to reach a higher level. And while most people try to avoid that.
Yeah, and I love what you're saying. And it's we can even take it a step further. First of all, what they're actually doing is they're creating neural connections that are making mediocrity more, prevalent. So without knowing it, this is the thing that I think is really interesting when we look at this idea of what practice really means is that like people think, like, they'll go practice. Let's say your dad, there's something in his brain that thinks he's practicing and getting, there's some element of value that he sees in this thing called hard work. Mm-hmm. So he thinks the hard work and practice he's doing, but he never really looked at, or maybe he doesn't care. Might be a bad example. But someone else might not have, they might have just been so attached to this idea of hard work, and hard work equates to practice, but they never really looked at, is their practice doing any good? And this is a constant theme in my work. It's constant because people want to look good, like, hey, I'm working hard, I'm putting a lot of effort, I'm doing this for 12 hours, and I listen to what they're doing, and all I can think is, you just wasted 12 hours, right? So it's that type of awareness that if we don't have that awareness and really look at like breaking through what the world tells us, just go practice a lot. Well, we don't typically take it deeper than that.
That's so true. We focus on practicing, repeating the same patterns over and over again, which is fine. But if you want to improve yourself, then there's only one way. It's like challenge yourself. To reach a higher level. There's no other way around. So
well, and then at some point when you practice enough and you're really in that, your work goes from something mechanical to more of something that looks like art.
Yeah.
And I think one of my favorite things really in my own world right now is actually observing you and what you do with your own show. I'd love for our listeners to understand like the evolution that the practice that you have of creating this amazing show that's the top in the Netherlands, that I happen to know that you've got a lot of people that book you, and there's a reason for that. There's a reason why you are constantly having these requests. It's because you've turned in this. I mean, you've created this piece of art called your show. Can you talk a little bit about like how that evolved and what had you be at this level of performance?
Well, what I did with comedy is what I didn't do with guitar playing. I'm a reasonable guitar player, but when I was younger, I never really challenged myself to the highest level. I wasn't unaware of how it works. So I stayed on a reasonable level, but the guys with whom I was playing guitar are way better now. So when I started to doing comedy and combining it with neuroscience, that's when I realized I have to keep challenging myself. So I would do my show, and even though I would get great response from it, I would even make it better and better. And I still keep challenging myself. Like yesterday, I think 97% of the show went perfectly, and I messed up 3%. And I hate that. So I'm in the car thinking about those 3%, what did I do wrong? And so next time, I'm going to improve that. So I'm never satisfied if it's not perfect. And that's just pure passion. It's not like I have to prove myself or so. I just love doing that. And I mean, life is a game, you know? So I love playing the game and doing that kind of stuff to improve it to the highest level. And yeah, that's when you get ratings like over 9 out of 10. That's like, okay, I'm on the right track now. But it's like, it's a constant being busy with challenging yourself. That's what it's all about.
My experience, especially in our relationship and working with you and observing, the creative aspects of what we're doing and how you continually, I can tell it, your brain, I can almost feel it from across the ocean. It's like, all right, look, how can I do this in a different way? But I want to make something really clear about this idea of dissatisfied, because if people are, if they're not aware of our conversation, I don't believe you're talking about dissatisfied as something that would involve suffering.
True.
You're talking about dissatisfaction that is the thing that moves you. It's a feeling that moves you to the next level of creation or taking your creation further.
Yeah.
And it's actually something you welcome. It's not something you're trying to avoid and push down, right?
Exactly. That's why, for me, this non-duality basis is so important. So if I, for instance, mess up part of my show, there's no suffering like I should have done it differently and why does this happen to me? Because there's the realization that this is just as it is. And from that point, when there's no struggle, no mental struggle and no emotional drama, you've got all energy left to just improve what you like to improve. And so it's not dissatisfaction in a way of suffering. It's just like passion of making things more beautiful. And I think
that's right. And
it goes same for your coaching. I mean, you have coached, I know how many hours. If you would have repeated the same pattern as the way you coach like in the beginning, I'm sure the way you do it now is totally different.
That's a fact. Yeah. So let's see. I've been in this line of, well, I don't call it work because I would call it love, really. I've been doing what I do basically all day, every day for about a decade now. In the beginning, for sure. I mean, I can very vividly remember, leaving a call, thinking, did I ask the right questions? Did I do this? Did I do that? It was all kind of prescriptive in nature.
Yeah.
And I would actually spend brain cycles, energy in some level suffering from this, but through doing it enough over time, and I don't remember when it happened, there was a flip. And so quite often I think about this, I'll get up in the morning and I'll kind of even wonder what I'm actually going to say. It's like I'm observing myself.
Yeah.
And I've heard you talk about that at times about even your own show. Sometimes you're just creating and you get to watch at some level, you get to watch yourself when it moves to this place of art or flow.
I think that's when you reach the highest level. For instance, a soccer player in the beginning, that's why they become really good when they're 23, 24 years old, because then they have trained for the approximately 10,000 hours and challenged themselves. And from that point on, you can start to play, let's say, in flow. So you don't have to think about what you do, but your body automatically does the right things. And that's what we say, you become aware of your own actions. Because there's simply the unconscious brain that brings you to the right spot on the field, does the right actions, and scores the goal.
I want to be able to link this to an area that a lot of people don't consider practice or practicing, and this would be in the field of leadership. So one of the things that I work really closely with my clients on is sort of creating that that visual, first of all, of, let's say, practicing an instrument, learning fundamental aspects of something.
Yeah.
And you know, obviously you know this, but we wrote a book about the fundamental aspects of the human mind. So one of the things that we work on in the beginning is getting a real sense of, you know, how does this instrument work in general?
Yes.
You know, there's all different types of guitars that have different nuances to them, but, you know, in general, they all work kind of the same, kind of like the human mind. And so as it pertains, how do we practice around something called leadership? Well, a lot of the work that I do in the beginning with folks is to be able to have them understand what the D chord is of a human being. What the C chord is, what the F chord is, what are those different things?
Cool.
So when over time, as you continue to work and educate, they start to see these individual people that are in their lives, let's say, different. They start to see them more like patterns, and they start to see them more from an objective point of view. And what tends to leave is judgment, blame, guilt, and that, to where we start to actually deal with reality. And so in the beginning, when I work with folks, it's that pounding on and the commitment to practicing an understanding of human beings. And it's just that the patterns, we're not looking to do anything with it. But then at some point in my leadership work, when you start to really get that and sort of the guilt and blame and shame and all the stuff that comes with being in other relationships starts to melt away, there really does start to be this place that people can operate called art, or called pure leadership or pure action, based on a vision versus based on they're basically just interacting with people to make themselves look good or control the world or whatever, like we wrote in our book.
Yeah.
So this isn't some pitch about our book, but that's really many ways why we wrote the book.
Yeah.
It's such a great tool for me to be able to hand to my clients and say, look, we can start to work and see, how does cognitive dissonance work within typical human beings?
True. It's first like becoming aware of things and then putting it in practice. That's the only way you can improve.
Yeah.
So, but it starts by recognizing, and I love the way of just looking at people's patterns, because we are, in a way, an algorithm with patterns. That's what we are.
That's right. And if we can understand, that's like recognizing that there are patterns on the fretboard of a guitar or whatever we're talking about that are there. And if I'm not aware of them, I can't create from a place that has near the possibility that I could with understanding them, or having some understanding and access. So, I mean, this is just such a really, I think, an underlooked at topic.
True.
And one that I think is really worthwhile looking at. What are we practicing? What are the patterns that we repeat? Are we actually moving further towards what we're looking to create or not?
Yeah. Or are we simply running around in circles, which often happens?
Well, which I would say is the majority. So
yes.
Well, anyway, great discussion today. Once again, it's gone by really fast. But for anyone who'd like to know a little bit more about what we're up to, there is our website called cloudlessmind.com. We also wrote a short book called A Cloudless Mind. And then there's a number of podcasts on YouTube, and go subscribe to our channel. Anyway, it's great to be with you, Paul. I'll talk with you next time.